Can you make money freeze drying? Absolutely. Just see my video, how to make six figures. That's 6 figures per month using commercial freeze dryers. Can you lose money? Yes, unfortunately, you can lose money. This is just like any type of business. So the question is, how do you lose money? How do you avoid losing money? We'll talk about that in today's video. So today I'm going to tell a story. I'm going to put this in story format. And then for those of you brave enough to sit through my story, maybe there will be this special quirky bonus at the end for you, just for my most dedicated fans. So, okay, let's start the story. So any good story starts with once upon a time, right? So once upon a time, there was a man, let's call him Jack. He's in the desert Southwest, so let's call him Jack Sand. So Jack Sand is an entrepreneur at heart. And he also has a passion for creating really nutritious foods. So naturally, and this happened more than 10 years ago, Jack found himself going out and buying a freeze dryer. Now, at the time, there was really only two types of freeze dryers available. There was the small home units made by a company that's also in the sort of desert Southwest of the United States. And that was it, or commercial units. Now, of course, commercial units run in the hundreds of thousands, and the small home units run in the thousands. So pretty easy decision, particularly when you're just starting out. So this is what Jack did, right? He went out and got himself a freeze dryer, and over the course of, I don't know, a while, he decided to try a number of different things, freeze drying them at home. This is what people do. And eventually he came upon this one particular crispy snack that his family and friends just couldn't get enough of. So he said, maybe we have a product here. So he went into this as an entrepreneur. So immediately he decided to start making some of this. He took it down to the local farmer's market in, let's call it Dust Haven in the desert Southwest. And, pretty soon he was selling out. And so when he started selling out, he realized, oh, geez, I have a new problem. My new problem is I don't have enough production to meet up with demand. So, of course, what he did is he went out and bought some more of the small home units. You buy a second unit for whatever, $3,000 or less. And pretty soon you double your production. Then you triple it and quadruple it. Well, these small units are only good for a certain amount of time, for a certain amount of production. So it's really easy to get to the point where it's so hard to scale with these little tiny units that you need something bigger. Well, now fortunately for Jack at the time, this company, this OEM, was actually working on larger units. So they came out with the XL, their extra large unit, and the scientific version, and then eventually they even came out with what they called their commercial unit. Beware of that one. So anyway, so Jack actually got on board with this. He got some of these machines. But and I've alluded to this in previous videos, there are penalties to pay for doing a lot of production on a lot of small machines. And guess what problems Jack ran into? Exactly those problems. Right, to freeze dry, you have to pump heat into your product to vaporize the moisture, and then you have to pump the heat out of your chamber via your refrigeration system in order to condense that moisture. For those of you that think the moisture comes out via the vacuum pump, that's not really the case. It comes out via the ice, right? The vast lion's share of the moisture comes out via the ice. I'm going to say 97%, maybe 98% of the moisture that you get out of your product is going to end up in that ice. Plus some other things like maybe a few sugars and some aromatics and that sort of stuff. So you've got to pump all that heat. And since the refrigeration systems are on board in these small units, all the way up through the commercial units, that heat's going to end up in your building. Now, Jack was leasing his building from a landlord who has an HVAC system on it with a certain spec, certain capacity. and not exactly thrilled about the idea of upgrading it. So essentially, Jack kind of ran out of the ability to add any more machines to his process because he was already generating too much heat. And during the summer months in the desert Southwest, which last, I don't know, from the end of April to the end of October, the conditions are just too hot for his employees. Right? He would prefer not to have cooked employees at the end of the day. There was actually some other problems that were happening with Jack's operation. Part of which was he's selling a little bit of his own product at retail prices. And I've shown you the difference in our spreadsheet calculations. If you haven't seen those, check out my other YouTube videos. The difference between retail prices and wholesale prices can make quite a radical difference on your bottom line. And Jack actually started selling some of his product at local grocery stores and some, chain stores, some like national chain stores, but in a regional sort of way. So when you do that, you have to be careful to defend your margins. You have to be adamant about making sure that you're asking a price that will pay for your machines, your labor, your power, your rent, your admin. It's got to pay for all of it, or else you don't have a business. So it turned out that the more that Jack was making, the more machines and the higher the power went, right? And the higher the labor costs. Because remember, all these little machines have all these little trays. You have this chaotic dance going on in your facility. It becomes more and more laborious. And of course, the utility costs just kind of got out of control. Now, Jack actually tried to upgrade to a commercial unit much earlier in his business path, but at the time, the OEM of choice, who makes their machines in the U.S., said, you have to have high voltage 3-phase power in order to run one of these units, and Jack's building just didn't have it, so he's really kind of stuck, and that's how he ended up with a whole fleet of small home freeze dryers. And this is a cautionary tale, right? Because I've heard many people actually go that route, right? Where they simply say, this unit is $7,000. It's much cheaper than this one that's $70,000 or $700,000. Yes, but there is a price to pay. I even had in my comments a software developer who said, well, no, it actually only makes sense if you have a smaller cost per pound processed in your smaller machines, that you just infinitely scale your smaller machines rather than go to larger machines. Of course, this is how software works, right? Because there's no limit to the scalability. When you are trying to scale up your business, though, you have to be proactive and not reactive. Well, what do I mean by that? I mean, that's a very vague statement, and everyone can just nod your head, say, oh, yeah, I understand that. But here's what happens. You are making a certain amount of product, and somebody comes by and says, hey, I have such and such a chain store. I'd really like to order this many thousands of packets. And now you're stuck because you've got a limited production capacity. And if you try to get a commercial machine at this time, they all take 6 to 7 months. I mean, actually, the ones that come from overseas are going to be longer than that. The commercial machine makers in the United States, the shortest one actually is TechSource. They're at 6 months. Parker's states that theirs is 6 to 9 months. I mean, I've heard it on their broadcasts. So if you wait until you get that offer from somebody for high volume to start looking at a commercial machine and moving, let's call it heaven and earth, to make that happen, you're going to end up continually buying the machine that you don't want, that's not going to be good for your business long term, because of the short lead time. And this is the worst possible means or criteria by which to make your decision. It's going to torpedo you. You're going to paint yourself into a corner. Eventually, Jack's numbers went from green to gray and eventually to red. What do I mean by red? I mean he's losing money on every packet he sells rather than making money. Now, part of it is because he is production limited. He can't make that much product for the overhead costs that he has. His overheads are sort of fixed, right? His rent, his utilities are somewhat fixed. His employees are flexible, but he needs a minimum number. He's got certain costs that are associated with refrigeration and cooking and chopping and slicing and all that sort of stuff. Packaging. You can't really start to realize the economies of scale until you get to the point where you can have real scale. And the only way you can ever do that in freeze drying is to get commercial units. So plan ahead. Don't paint yourself into a corner where you're stuck. Now, I have the maximum amount of empathy for Jack because he was literally doing this at a time when he had so few options. And then he was even told by a commercial OEM that he couldn't operate his system on the utilities provided when that's actually not the case. With a little bit of creative thinking, that OEM could have helped him. So anyway, here's the killer. Here's the killer. Once you have red numbers in your business, the equipment finance people, your banks and whoever you're going to get credit from, they don't want to have anything to do with you, right? They're not going to extend you credit because they don't have any confidence that you're going to pay them back because you're literally losing money. You can say to them, well, hey, the reason I'm losing money is because I don't have enough production, and they can nod their heads, but at the end of the day, it's too much of a risk. So you need to not wait until you are turning red. Okay, so what can Jack do? Because he's in a pickle. Although his treat is not pickles. Jack can raise the prices of his product. Okay, he's stuck with one way to get out of this jam for now. There's only one that's going to be immediate enough to save his operation, and that's to raise the price of his product. Look, I don't know how many times I've talked to people who are in business, whether tiny or small or medium or large. They have this drilled in belief that you increase your sales by lowering the price of your product. In fact, it's taught in Economics 101, right? I mean, I was in Economics 101, and that was one of the things of drivel that they tried to put my way. That's the least of the harmful things that they tried to teach me that are absolutely terrible and wrong. The fact is that if you are selling premium product, and look, freeze-dried product is premium product. If you're selling premium product, you're selling to people who are willing to pay for premium product. And they are just as likely to pay $1 extra a packet or 50 cents an extra for a packet, because to them it's not as important. What is important to them is the quality, the nutrition profile, the tastiness of the snack, the consistency, all the things that they're looking for. They're no longer shopping on price. Those people who are shopping on price are not your customers. They're not your customers. So Jack is going to have to raise his prices, and he's going to have to do it soon. Now, good news. Good news here. Raising your prices is one of the fastest, most effective ways to get back in the green, because let's say you're on the precipice. You're just barely red. Raising your price a little bit can make an enormous impact on your actual profit percentage. Because the price rise is, let's say it's 10%, you're raising your prices by 10%. Well, that's 10% on the retail price. That's 10% on your revenue, right? That's 10% on your revenue. But your profits are, even if your profits are 10% of revenue, and Jack would be thrilled if his profits were 10%, but even if they're only 10%, that means that you have a 10-to-1 ratio multiplier factor, that when you raise price on the revenue, which is the cost of your goods, the price that you're charging, you get 10 times as much effect on your profit line. So raise your price, Jack. You got to raise them, right? And anyone else out there who is in this business, who's starting, you need to defend your margins. Now, there's different ways you can do that. You can raise your production while keeping your costs steady. This is also in Jack's plan, and he's looking at how to do this. And I'm racking my brain trying to figure out how to help him at least get over this hump. And I've got some ideas. We'll be talking later. So you can do that, or you can raise your price, or you can shift more of your sales from wholesale to retail. Now, this involves an entirely different skill set, marketing, right? Not sales, marketing, right? Marketing is how you get your product in front of somebody else's eyeballs, right? That's marketing. Sales is how do you convert, right? How do you convince them to that this is the thing that they actually want right now? Sales is cash flow, marketing is growth. So if you try to, if you need or decide to try to shift from wholesale to retail, you're going to have to learn some things about marketing. Now, good news is the world of marketing has gotten so much more of a level playing field now than it ever has been. You know what I'm talking about, right? We're talking about digital marketing. There are a lot of ways to do that. And one great way is to get yourself involved in social media, where you can start to promulgate your message, where you can create a story about your product that actually makes it compelling to somebody, and then you share that story on social media. You could start a YouTube channel like me. You could do TikTok. You can do Facebook. If you're doing B2B products, I highly recommend YouTube. If you're doing B2C, Facebook and TikTok are considered some of the, and Instagram. These are all considered the primary ground for customer sales, retail sales of product. And since you're going to be making freeze-dried product, I think that's probably the platforms you want to be on. So I hope you liked my story. Let's call it a mid-desert night's dream. So are you ready for your quirky bonus that comes at the end? So I wrote a little poem, and it is actually for those of you who this case study maybe cuts a little close. So here goes. If this telling did offend, such a thing did not intend. A tale that cuts too close to heart might be the teller's lack of art. With nuggets in, we hope amend. Keep the diamonds in the end. And give a like before you part, else the puck a broken heart. All right, I hope you liked my little quirky bonus. See you on the next one.